penalties, hard battles, and a change in the Constructors' Championship. This week I'm chatting all about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, so get ready because you've been summoned to the Steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Steward's office. I'm Saira, and this week F1 headed out to Baku for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We have sometimes had chaos when we've gone out to Azerbaijan, and because it's a street circuit it just carries a little bit more risk with it. So I thought this was going to be a fairly interesting Grand Prix. What we did end up getting with this weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix is a lot of stuff going on at the front of the field and for the race win, and not so much going on at the back, but we're going to get into all of that. News that we had happen over this week though, obviously Kevin Magnussen had to serve his race ban that he got after the last Grand Prix. He hit 12 penalty points, had to sit a race out. Haas made the very obvious choice of Ollie Behrman coming into that seat, so he was going to be racing at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Kevin Magnussen's seat. His second race this Formula 1 season with a different team. The biggest piece of news that we had in the run-up to this weekend is the fact that Adrian Newey has signed with Aston Martin. Now, after he left Red Bull, there was so much conversation about where he was going to go, if he was going to go anywhere. A couple of people did think that he might opt to retire because he is getting a little bit older, and he has spoken about just wanting to sail in his boat in his retirement. So there was a lot of conversation about would he just leave F1 altogether and decide now is the right time to step away and retire, or was he going to look for another challenge with a different team? But more and more of the rumours were about the fact that he was talking to different teams up and down the grid and where he might go. A lot of rumours linking him to Ferrari and Williams for quite a while. Those seemed like the top contenders. Williams he had worked with before in his career, so maybe a nice way for him to round out the end of his career. With Ferrari, he always said that he would have loved to work with Ferrari. He would have loved to have worked with Lewis Hamilton, so people thought the timing might have been right for that. But then in the last couple of weeks there were so many rumours linking him to Aston Martin, and then over the last 2 weeks, I would say, we have heard so much more just about Aston Martin, the fact that they had signed him, how much they had signed him for. So not the best kept secret in Formula 1. These things don't tend to be. We just get so many different leaks and stuff. He's still on gardening leave with Red Bull, and that essentially means that he can't work with another team. He has to take that time away from both Red Bull and Aston Martin now. His next race will be the season opener in Australia in 2025. He'll be officially off of gardening leave then. It doesn't sound like he will be coming to any of the races with Red Bull for the rest of the season. He was popping up in a couple of them, but it does sound like now that he's officially signed with the team, he won't be attending any more races. But not going to be working on the 2025 car. He might have an influence later down the line with some of the upgrades, but in terms of the concept and what they bring out to Australia pre-season testing, he won't have a say in that really, or at all, because he just can't work on that car. 2026 is when we really will see the impact of Adrian Newey at Aston Martin and what that might mean for the team, especially with those new regulations coming in. It is a massive, massive signing for Aston Martin, there is no doubt about that, but I think we have to be really careful about how much influence he will have on the team, because Adrian Newey is a fantastic engineer. Fantastic is not even the right word to use when it comes to this guy. He is phenomenal at what he does. He is the engineer of Formula 1. His track record at making race-winning, championship-winning cars is insane. There is no doubt about the talent that this man has, but everyone says it, and I'm sure he will say the same thing, is that one man does not make a team, and he will have the full Aston Martin team around him. The drivers, the strategy teams, the engineering teams, all of that have to feed and play into it. So it's not saying that Adrian Newey is going to go to Aston Martin and he's going to win a championship with them and he's going to make this championship winning car for Alonso and Lance Stroll and it's going to be great for them. We're not saying that, and I'm definitely not saying that, but I'm going to be so interested in 2026 to see what impact he can have on that team, because in general they're a team that are just in the midfield right now. They've had strong starts in 2023 and that's not been able to carry on for them. So I'm wondering if maybe he can help keep the momentum going for them if they look like they have a decent car, especially say beginning of next year when he is able to start working with the team. If they can bring a car into testing that looks okay, can he help them just keep that momentum as the year goes on? But that was the big piece of news really. We haven't heard anything about Sauber or VCarb and their driver signings. Those are really the last pieces of the puzzle that we're waiting for silly season, but at least we know where Adrian Newey is going. There was actually one other piece of news for us to go through, and that was the fact that McLaren have finally come to a decision about papaya rules and the Drivers' Championship. Now, before this weekend, we didn't really have any clarification on McLaren and whether they were really putting stock into Lando potentially winning the WDC. They did say it was possible, but they were still using papaya rules, basically saying that both drivers can fight fair. Oscar wasn't necessarily being asked to help out Lando Norris in order to help him win the WDC. Going into the Azerbaijan weekend though, and McLaren did clarify that yes, they were going to try and help Lando win that Drivers' Championship with Oscar. And it wasn't necessarily that they were just going to ask Oscar to give Lando a race win, but that basically, yeah, if it was 50-50 on who could win a race, they would be supporting Lando more in that case to help him get the championship, and Oscar had agreed to that. But yeah, it wasn't going to be sort of hold back and switch positions and that's it. So there was more clarity there. I think after what happened in Monza, they really did need to clarify what they wanted to do with their drivers, because it was spoken about a lot in the media, a lot by the F1 presenters, and I think even McLaren realised that yeah, we need to have some sort of rule in place here. Not a rule, but we just need to say whether or not. But yeah, Oscar had also said, you know what, yeah, I will help Lando out. It's not a case of just pulling over and letting him pass, but where I can help him, I will. Let's get into all of the on-track action though, kicking off with practice, and we had so many red flags throughout our practice sessions. We had Charles Leclerc and Franco Colapinto crash in FP1, both of those causing separate red flags. FP3, we had Ocon stopping on track, and then Ollie Behrman crashing, and both of those things had also caused separate red flags. Not great for any of those teams or any of those drivers. A lot of time being lost in practice sessions because of those red flags, and I feel like on a street circuit you really don't want to lose time in practice, especially for the likes of Colapinto and Behrman. Behrman has raced at Baku before with Formula 2 last year. He won the sprint and the feature race in Baku last year, but hasn't done it in an F1 car. Franco Colapinto has never driven in Baku. It was his rookie year in F2 before he got pulled up into F1, before F2 had obviously headed out to Baku, so it was his first taste of the circuit. So those two drivers definitely, I think, were gonna want that time. The only other thing that I think happened in practice that's kind of noteworthy is the fact that between FP1 and FP2 on the Friday, George Russell ended up changing engines. So Mercedes had taken oil samples from the engines, and with George Russell's engine oil, they had found some particles in it that was concerning to them, and so they opted to replace his engine as a precautionary measure, which did end up meaning he lost a little bit of time in FP2 while they were sorting all of that out. Qualifying, what happened there? So before qualifying even began, Zhou Guanyu, we knew, was going to be taking some grid place penalties for a couple of parts that had been changed on his car. He was basically going to be towing Valtteri Bottas along because they knew it wouldn't really matter where Zhou ended up qualifying if he was going to be starting at the back of the grid basically. But towing him along didn't do a whole load for Valtteri Bottas because Bottas still couldn't get out of Q1. To be fair, qualifying was a fairly tame affair for most of the teams, except for Lando Norris. Lando Norris, who was eliminated in Q1 and qualified in P17. There was a little bit of confusion because at the end of Q1, we had a yellow flag, someone had spun off, and I think for Lando, it was still showing a yellow when it should have been white. He didn't need to slow down at that point, and it basically wrecked his last fast lap, and that's what caused him to be eliminated. So yeah, a little bit of confusion there. That meant that he qualified way lower down than what he should have over the weekend. Other than that, I think Q3 was where we had a little bit of, not drama, but Williams ended up leaving a fan in Alex Albon's car. So he drove out the pits ready for the last fast lap at Q3, and there was a fan still in his car, and he can't drive with that in. He had to stop on the side just as he came out of the pits, pull it out, and then throw it off to the side. And Williams did get fined for that, not Alex Albon, because it was an unsafe release, obviously. And you do have to wonder how Williams had managed to forget to remove a fan that is really big and also is in neon yellow. Alex did say he thought it was just because there was a rush to try and get out and get a tow from other people, because a tow is worth a lot on a circuit like Azerbaijan. But yeah, that hurry up and that rush meant that the mechanics forgot there was a fan in his car, and in the end, because he had to spend time taking that fan out, he didn't end up setting a fast lap. But at the end of the day, he was still in Q3. It was P10. It was a really good qualifying for them up until that point. And Franco Colapinto also in Q3. So regardless of the fan and the fine, Williams actually had a pretty good qualifying session. I do also want to point out the fact that even though Oliver Behrman didn't get into Q3, he was in Q2, but did out-qualify his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, so that was a really good performance from him as well. Charles Leclerc on pole, Oscar Piastri P2, and then Sergio Perez in P3, and that was Charles Leclerc's fourth pole in a row at Baku. This man just knows how to qualify in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, because it is incredible to have 4 poles in a row at the same circuit. Post-qualifying though, Pierre Gasly did get disqualified. He had exceeded the instantaneous fuel mass flow limit, and that was an instant disqualification for him, so he was going to be starting at the back of the grid. Coming to Sunday morning, we find out that Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon have both got pit lane starts because they changed the PU and some other things on their cars, and with Lewis Hamilton, he had also changed the setup. So 2 drivers starting in the pit lane, and it did mean that anyone behind them was moving up at least 1, potentially 2 places. So for the likes of Lando Norris, great, he went from P17 to P15 before he even got through the formation lap, which is great. Like I mentioned at the start of this episode, though, the race itself wasn't the most exciting. We didn't have a whole load going on. It was a really good race start. All the drivers got through the first 2 turns with no problem. And if you had watched Formula 2 earlier, or you caught up on it, I did have a little bit of anxiety after seeing what had happened in F2 at the start of the race. But no, the drivers were really safe, really clean, and had gotten through the first 2 turns with no problem. I say no problem. Okay, there was a bit of contact between Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda. It ended up causing a puncture to Lance Stroll's tyre. He had to go and pit on that first lap because there was no way he was going to be able to carry on racing, and that chucked him right to the back of the field. Can I just say that for Colapinto and Behrman, their first races in Baku in a Formula 1 car. For Colapinto, his first ever race in Baku. And both of them, it was only their second ever Formula 1 race as well. For them both to be able to hold on to their positions in those opening few laps of the race is incredible. It is so hard on a street circuit anyway for seasoned drivers who know how to drive a street circuit like Baku in a Formula 1 car, but for these rookie drivers to come in to have had a clean first lap and to hold on to position as well is so good. What were some of the other highlights of this race though? I mean, Ocon had that pit lane start and didn't really move, to be fair, from the back of the grid after that. Tsunoda ended up having to retire from the race because he had damage to the side pod that we saw after he retired, so no way that he was going to be able to carry on racing. Alex Albon did an incredible stint on the hard tyres for 26 laps, and Lando Norris did the same, but the fact that Alex Albon was in 5th place on that strategy absolutely insane. The Williams car was working just so well over this weekend. Lance Stroll eventually retired quite a bit later on to the race. I think he must have had the damage because of that contact with Tsunoda. It was a brake issue in the end that he retired from. But I think with Tsunoda and Stroll, I am quite surprised. With Tsunoda's case, the damage to the side pod, surprised they let him run as long as he did, because feasibly, surely he could not run until the end of the race. And with Stroll, I mean, if they knew that brake issue was happening and he wasn't making up places, he was in 20th and not really moving, not really nowhere near the points, I'm surprised they also let him run as long as he did, because even the data at that point for both teams and both drivers with that damage, it's not going to be the most useful data. Biggest highlight from the race though is what happened in that penultimate lap 50 to 51, a crash between Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz as they were battling for P3, and that caused the VSC to come out and everyone behind them moved up 2 places because they had retired from the race because of that. It was a really interesting crash because in the run up to that it was Charles in P2, Sergio Perez P3, Carlos Sainz P4. Oscar Piastri was leading the race way ahead at this point, and Perez tried to get past Charles. Charles held him off. Carlos, I think, had gotten past Sergio. They were trying to battle for position. Carlos went onto the dirty side of the track, and it didn't look like Sergio was really moving anywhere. He wasn't moving left or right. He had his line and he was just carrying on driving, and it just seemed that Carlos had drifted over to Sergio and it put them both in the wall. Now, I don't know whether it's just because Carlos had gotten his tyres dirty and, you know, maybe he was trying to make a small adjustment and it just caused him to crash into Sergio. Definitely didn't do it on purpose, but I'm very curious what led up to that. I don't think there is any blame on Sergio. It's been like over an hour after the race and I've not yet heard anything about a penalty for Carlos Sainz. I do think there will be something. Regardless though, it ended both of their races, which is absolutely gutting for them. Gutting for Red Bull, who needed the points to try and stay ahead in the constructors, and gutting for Ferrari, who also needed those points because they're not far off McLaren or Red Bull at this point. They could easily try to fight for P1 or P2 in the constructors. So both teams desperately in need of those points. A potential podium for Sergio Perez or for Carlos Sainz gone. Everyone behind them though, I mean, they were probably glad that they were able to move up 2 points, and not glad of the crash, but glad that there were more points that they were able to get, because for George Russell it did mean a podium that I don't think Mercedes thought that they were in the fight for at any point of this race, and it did give a chance for some of the smaller teams to gain more points. But yeah, that crash from Sergio and Carlos Sainz, unnecessary, unneeded, and just race ending for the both of them. Did mean that the race also ended on a VSC, which, yeah, not great, but for safety purposes, absolutely necessary. George Russell was saying after the race was done that, yeah, he was surprised the safety car didn't get called out sooner, because the sun was coming into his eyes as he came across that crash and he couldn't see super well what was going on and was just having to navigate carbon fibre and the cars. Oscar Piastri though ended up taking his second ever Grand Prix win in only his second season of Formula 1. It's his second win of the season as well, and what an amazing drive from him and an amazing battle between him and Charles Leclerc, who came in P2, George Russell in P3, and I will run through all the rest of the points runners. But just to talk about Oscar and Charles, an amazing battle at the front from both of those drivers. Sergio Perez was involved a little bit as well, but that first stint from Charles Leclerc was incredible. He pulled about a 5 to 6 second gap between him and Piastri, and after those first and only pit stops of the race, Oscar just had a car that could handle the hard tyres very well. First of all, Charles didn't, but Oscar also drove such an incredible race. There was a beautiful overtake that he had on Charles Leclerc to take the race lead, and then from that point onward, no problem. Both of them drove such a clean race. It was good racing. It was so fun to watch, and it was neck and neck. I mean, Charles didn't let Oscar run away with it straight away. It was only towards the end of the race when Charles's tyres were falling off. But overall, I mean, from both of them, incredible race. But for Oscar, especially in your second season, to be driving like that, wow, absolutely amazing. Who were the rest of our point runners though? We had Lando Norris in P4, which is an amazing comeback from him from starting P15, Max Verstappen in P5, Fernando Alonso P6, and then it was Alex Albon, Franco Colapinto, Lewis Hamilton and Ollie Behrman. So double points for Williams. Lewis Hamilton really benefiting from the 2 DNFs that happened later on in the race, because it did not look like he was on to score points at any point in the race really. Ollie Behrman also benefiting and taking a point home, and Lando Norris, even though he had that awful luck in qualifying, still managed to finish ahead of Max Verstappen. But let's go through all of the teams individually, and I'm going to have to change things around because instead of me starting with Red Bull as the championship leaders, I will be starting with McLaren, because after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri brought home enough points for them to overtake Red Bull for the Constructors' Championship. It is the first time since the Australian Grand Prix in 2014 that McLaren have led the Constructors' Championship. I mean, what do you even say, when you think about how long it's been that they've been waiting to lead a championship again, to have done it with two very, very strong drivers after an incredible race from Oscar Piastri and from Lando Norris. Very, very well deserved for them. It was a lot of hard work that went into it over the last couple of seasons. Since the regulations came in, they're a team that you can see have really worked behind the scenes to build a car that can rival Red Bull, and now they've surpassed Red Bull. They are by far the quickest, strongest car on track. They have a car that suits every circuit, that treats all of the tyres well, and they have two drivers who are hungry, who are willing to work, and who drive so well on a Grand Prix weekend. They have it all right now, and so absolutely no surprise that they're leading the Constructors' Championship. Question is, can they hold on to it for the rest of the season? And yeah, I think they can, as long as their drivers can keep their heads down, Lando and Oscar, as long as, the engineering department, the strategy team just carry on doing what they're doing. There's no reason that they won't be taking home the Constructors' Championship this year, and that would be amazing to see. But let's be honest, right? The start of this weekend was not great for the team. It wasn't easy. They didn't, for me, come in looking like the strongest team. That looked like Ferrari. They didn't seem as switched on as they usually do, as McLaren have shown in the past couple of races. And I think overall, Oscar has seemed the stronger driver over the weekend, and not just in the race, but also throughout practice and everything. It's not that Lando looked completely off of the pace, but I think Oscar just seemed a little bit stronger and a little bit happier with the car, I would say, and what the circuit was doing. Like I mentioned, that really badly timed yellow flag for Lando Norris during qualifying was not helpful. He shouldn't have qualified in P17 with the pace that he had, but it was what he was going to have to work with. And he drove an incredible race, drove cleanly through the pack, did his overtakes, didn't make contact with anyone, no damage on the car. And to finish in P4, I would be so happy with that, because he did everything he could. And I think that is a really solid, decent result. To also finish ahead of Max Verstappen as well. I mean, you can't complain with that, really. I don't think so anyway. He needs to be able to grab some kind of points advantage over Max Verstappen, and even though it might not have been as much as what he would have wanted, it's still something, and it's still helping him slowly close that gap with Max. Oscar Piastri though, it was just such a beautiful win from him. It really showcased his talent and how strong he is as a driver. And I think he's just continuously proving to everyone, to McLaren, to Formula One, what a talent he is and what is going to happen as he continues to develop. Because I think sometimes we watch his racing and we forget this is only his second season and there is still stuff that he's learning. He said that himself, but he is learning it and he's quick to learn those things. And the more he's battling at the front, the more he'll understand how to deal with that pressure. And he's dealing with it absolutely beautifully at the moment. But the more and more he gets used to it, the less stressful it will be, because he said this was the most stressful weekend or stressful day of his life. But it is something that he will be able to manage just better and better as time goes on, and such a well-deserved win for Oscar Piastri, and one that I'm glad isn't marred in as much controversy as his first one was, because of everything that went on with McLaren team orders in his first race win. This one, just out and out his victory to enjoy, to celebrate, and to really just soak in that atmosphere and the love that McLaren is giving him for that. And that win to also be topped off with leading the Constructors' Championship is phenomenal. It's such a brilliant day for Oscar Piastri, and great that his mum was also there to see him win. Red Bull, right, let's get into it. P2 in the Constructors now. It's been a little while, let's be honest, since they've not been leading the Constructors' Championship. We knew that their era of complete dominance was over, but I don't think this is something that Red Bull are going to take lightly. They are going to come back fighting. Absolutely. They're not a team that are just going to be like, oh, well, no team is going to be like that. You know, oh, well, we're in P2, we'll just have to deal with it. They're going to be fighting hard, especially because Ferrari aren't that far back from them. But they just still don't seem to have fully understood or figured out why they're having the problems that they do. I think that was very evident this race. I saw a stat online that said that it was the first time in 6 years that Max Verstappen has not qualified in the top 5 in consecutive races. And first of all, can we say what an incredible stat that is in general for Max Verstappen, and really shows how consistent of a driver he is. Because, yeah, 6 years, they've not had a dominant car for that long. So it just shows how strong and consistent of a driver he is. But right now it's showing that, yeah, there are probably a couple of issues with that Red Bull car that go quite deep, and they really need to figure out how to fix. He was not a happy bunny this weekend. He wasn't happy with the car on race day. You know, he said it's just not handling the way he wants it to. The brakes weren't working. At one point, I don't think he really had the grip that he wanted. The rear was going everywhere. There were a lot of things with the Red Bull car for Max Verstappen he was not happy with. Perez, on the other hand, had a much better weekend than Max Verstappen up until the end of the race, that is, but was just more comfortable with the car. But this is also a track that he does so well at. He's podiumed multiple times. He's won multiple times at Baku. It's a racetrack that he just really thrives at, and we saw that this weekend. And I think that's what makes it more gutting to see the way his race ended up finishing. But yeah, this entire race weekend for Red Bull is not what they wanted. Sergio Perez DNFing, Max Verstappen not able to make it onto the podium, with Lando Norris finishing ahead of him and them losing the lead in the Constructors' Championship. And not a great pit stop for Max Verstappen either. So a lot I think they're going to be reflecting on, looking at, and trying to rectify, ready for Singapore, in the hopes that that is a better race. Ferrari, for a lot of this weekend, ended up seeming like the strongest car, the quickest car on track, and especially with Charles Leclerc. Pole for him, like I mentioned, 4 in a row at Baku, which is incredible. Didn't get the race win, but I think P2 is still an incredible result, and it's showing that we're getting more consistency from Ferrari, consistency that we were lacking in the middle of the season for them. This looks so much better. You know, a win in Monza, P2 here, it's consecutive podiums, and hopefully that'll just carry on as the year goes on. But a really strong weekend overall for them, and a weekend I think Charles Leclerc should be really proud of. I know that win in Baku is eluding him right now, and I was praying he would get it, even though I'm super chuffed that Oscar did. But I think P2 is still an incredible result, and yeah, I think it's showing that Ferrari have progressed and that they are slowly clawing back some of that speed and pace that they had lost. What I think didn't help them is the fact that, yeah, the minute Charles went onto the hard tyres, the car wasn't reacting to it. It wasn't helping him. They weren't very quick. And he said post-race that, yeah, they hadn't really done heavy, long fuel runs on the hard tyres. So the setup for the car with hard tyres wasn't really there. So hopefully that is something that Ferrari will look at and try and sort out and rectify ready for Singapore. Because it is strange they opted to do no hard tyre running. But I think that crash from Charles in FP1 did end up putting them on the back foot because they lost time in that running. Carlos Sainz, though, Yeah, it's just disappointing. You know, he would have at least been in P4, if not potentially a podium, and it would have been an amazing set of points that Ferrari really would have wanted to catch up with the other two teams, and it didn't happen. Looking at Mercedes, and it wasn't great for them. I mean, it wasn't awful, right? I mean, both drivers had to end up changing their engines. Lewis Hamilton's did mean that he needed to take a pit lane start, but both drivers changed engines, and that first stint that they both did on medium tyres did not work for them. It wasn't great. I mean, for Lewis, he got past a couple of the cars from that pit lane start and then seemed to stall behind Gasly, couldn't really get past him. Later on in the race, couldn't get past Ollie Behrman in the Haas. And the Alpine and the Haas are cars that you would think a Mercedes should not struggle to get past, but it was a struggle. I mean, George wasn't able to make massive moves, but when they got onto the hard tyres, he was able to get past Max Verstappen. There seemed to be a little bit more pace in the cars, but definitely need to figure out why the mediums weren't really working the way they would have hoped for them to. It did end up being a podium for George Russell and P9 for Lewis Hamilton, so still good points for the team. Inherited, yes, from that incident right at the end of the race, but points to take home nonetheless. Aston Martin saw a very good qualifying from Fernando Alonso, who got into Q3 and then finished in P8, Lance Stroll in P15, so it wasn't that great on his side of the garage. He then had that contact, the puncture, the early pit stop, had to retire from the race. Fernando Alonso, on the other hand, had a fairly good race. P6 from him, some good points for Aston Martin, and yeah, like I said, overall not a bad race from Fernando Alonso. VCARB, I mean, yes, Yuki Tsunoda qualified P12, retired from the race, so it's hard to say how his race pace was because, you know, he was running a damaged car for all of the race that he did run. Daniel Ricciardo finished in P13, which would have been P15 without the incident. So I think in general, VCARB's pace was not there this weekend. They still haven't figured out those issues that they have been having since they brought in that big upgrades package, and they can't seem to find the form that they had at the beginning of the season. They're still chasing, trying to find that form. And yeah, Haas have scored a single point in this race, which does mean, yes, they're closing a little bit more to VCARB for that P6 in the championship. And that moves us on to Haas, who had rookie Ollie Behrman in the car, an unlucky crash from him in FP3. He was so apologetic and hard on himself after that, but made up for it with an amazing qualifying where, yep, he did out-qualify Nico Hülkenberg. And Nico is a driver that is known for his qualifying form. Since he came back to F1, he's been incredible when it comes to qualifying. Great in the race too, but his quali form is something that really stands out. So for Ollie Behrman in his second ever F1 race with a completely different team, I know that Haas used the Ferrari engine, but they are not racing at the front of the field like Ferrari are. So for him to out-qualify Hülkenberg was amazing. And then to take a single point home with the team is so good for them and for him. He now has 7 points in the championship, so he is ahead of some of the seasoned drivers in the championship right now. But both of the cars had a very good race. Pace looked all right from them as well, so they are going to be looking at trying to catch up with VCARB for the rest of the season. It's then going on to Williams, who have managed to overtake Alpine. So they did not have the best weekend ever just because of that €5,000 fine, alright? If we tuck that away, this race weekend has actually been amazing for both of their drivers because the Williams pace has been incredible. Both drivers in Q3, both drivers finishing in the points. I mean, this was a dream weekend for Williams. They capitalised on what had happened in the race. They had drivers who were running in good enough places to get good, decent points home for the team. That's not something you can complain about. Albon finishing in 7th, Colapinto finishing in 8th, and listen, I know I will hold my hands up. I had doubts about Colapinto being pulled up into F1. I thought it was too early. I was worried that he might cause damage, and not a reflection on him, but just rookies coming in, you know, it happens. They will end up having more crashes than a much seasoned driver. For him to score points on his second race in Formula 1, and not a small amount of points, he was in PA, it was 4 points that he took home from this race is absolutely incredible and so amazing to see. I'm gutted though, the more I see him race, that Williams aren't going to be able to sign him for next year. They've already signed Carlos Sainz and they've got Alex Albon, so it is gutting that we're not going to see him next year. But a really, really incredible race from him and Alex Albon, and Williams looked absolutely chuffed when you see them post-race outside the garage with the boards and the champagne and everything. So great to see them celebrate a brilliant amount of points. Alpine have had a weekend, it's been tough for them. I will need to go through everything that's happened. So we have Esteban Ocon having an issue in FP1. FP2, Gasly had a battery issue and got in the way of Lando Norris. FP3, Esteban Ocon stopped on track with a faulty fuel pump. Gasly ended up being disqualified from qualifying. Esteban Ocon ended up starting from the pit lane with a new PU unit. And then they finished in 12th and 15th place with no points to show for all of the pain that they had. This was just an awful weekend for Alpine. I mean, at least both cars finished the race. I think that is potentially the only thing they can take away from this. But yeah, there was just so much that happened with this team. And I honestly think they're just waiting for this season to end at this point, because it doesn't look like they're getting a reprieve. And finally, Sauber, who did not score points again. Valtteri Bottas was the last of the finishers, which was P16, and then Zhou Guanyu was in P14. So it's not pulling together for them. We've only got a couple of races left, guys, and I don't know how much they really are focusing on this car anymore, because it would take a lot for them to find the pace that they need to be battling for the points. So I feel like a lot of that attention is just being focused on the 2025 car, and I don't blame them for that either. Oscar Piastri was the driver of the day, and yeah, I fully agree with that. Phenomenal race from him and a well-deserved second win. We are back next week for the Singapore Grand Prix, and this is my favourite track on the F1 calendar. I can't wait for it. I love a night race. I specifically love that Singapore is the night race. So I will see you guys for that next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you follow me on TikTok and Instagram at stewards_office, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Stewards office.